Welcome to Fight News Now. I'm John Pollock, alongside John Ramdeen. Mr. Ramdeen,
what's going on?
I know you have a lot on your mind.
There's just so much going on when you think of the combat sports world. Of course, Bellator's trying to establish their place as the clear number 2. The UFC is hammering shows down our throats. Ryzen just went down in Japan. Apparently 10 million people tuned in on Fuji TV, so I guess it's a good time if you're a mixed martial arts fan.
As you look at kind of what is going on at the moment with the UFC, there's a lot of focus this week on Jose Aldo. He's very upset about how everything has played itself out in regards to Conor McGregor, A, not being stripped of the featherweight title, and B, the fact he's once again fighting outside of the division. Do you sympathize with Jose Aldo's side at this point? He is taking the tack that I want out of my contract, and his coach, Andre Pedernera, saying we're willing to go to court for it, which, I mean, I understand where he's coming from. I just hate to see a fighter have to go this route, because we saw, John, with Randy Couture, that typically the end result is a fighter comes out of this on the losing end and losing X amount of their career.
Yeah, I agree. And yes, you have to feel for Jose Aldo. I think if you talk to some of the best trainers and fighters in the game, they recognize Jose Aldo as one of the biggest influences in the sport. He's affected the smaller weight divisions. You know, the UFC has never, besides Conor McGregor, had never had a 145-pound champion before. He made people tune into the WEC, so you can understand why Jose Aldo is the type of fighter that he is and how he's impacted the entire game. And he believes, because of everything that he did in the WEC and the UFC, especially co-headlining in front of 55,000 people in Toronto, that, and all the build-up with the Conor fight, that, you know, yes, it didn't happen the first time. There was the Chad Mendes fight, but yes, the UFC benefited, and then the massive fight between Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor, it didn't go Aldo's way, but it sets up a huge rematch. And if Jose Aldo was told, no matter what, Conor McGregor is going to go back down to 145 pounds and try to establish himself as the undisputed champion, that's the fight that's happening next after the second Nathan Diaz fight. And then it didn't happen. You can feel for Jose Aldo because, A, he deserves to make the most money possible, and I think this fight with Conor McGregor is that fight. But Dana White says no matter what, after this fight in New York City, he is going to vacate one of those titles. But he doesn't know which one it's going to be.
Isn't that the root problem of this whole thing? To me, it's Jose Aldo being upset that he was just repeatedly lied to. Yeah. And this is something that has played itself out many times. Last year, it was Miesha Tate who was promised a title fight and woke up and on Good Morning America found out, hey, that camp you've started, kind of worthless. You're not getting this title fight, nor what comes with fighting Ronda Rousey in the headliner position of a pay-per-view. Do you feel that if the UFC just had more of a honest dialogue with their fighters about what direction they're going, I think these fighters understand how this business works, and I think it's the repeated lying to that upsets a lot of these fighters. When Dana White was so adamant that Jose Aldo would be the next fight for Conor McGregor after McGregor fought Nate Diaz the second time, or he'd be stripped, and neither of which happened. I think honesty goes a whole long way with some of these fighters.
Sure, but you feel for Jose Aldo, but at the same time, if you're talking about business, it's going to be a very difficult task to sit Jose Aldo down and tell him, if you're Dana White, say, look at, I'm going to make way more money with Conor McGregor and Eddie Alvarez in New York City than I am with you. I'm going to make way more money, even if he ends up winning that fight and he doesn't relinquish the featherweight championship. I will still make way more money with the third fight with Nathan Diaz and Conor McGregor than I will with you. So, yes, you're in line, but you're at the back of the line. Wait your turn. We'll give you a bunch of fights. In the meantime, just wait for your opportunity to face off with Conor McGregor, because we're in the business of making money, and these fights are way more lucrative than a fight with you right now. Does anybody want to hear that? No, I don't think they do.
It's one thing for Aldo to be upset he's not getting the McGregor rematch, because that means a lot, monetarily. For him to be upset that Conor is not being stripped of the title, what is the difference? How is Jose Aldo different today as interim champion versus McGregor being stripped and he's announced as the regular champion? Does that make any difference?
No, it doesn't.
Jose Aldo fighting Max Holloway for the interim title or the real title, to me, there is zero difference in the amount of interest in that fight. It would be the same either way.
I agree with you 100%, and that's why I'm confused about what Jose Aldo's angle is. Yes, you feel for the guy. He's an individual who's worked his ass off to get where he is. He deserves, some give as well. But when it comes down to it, you're right. What happens if they decide to strip Conor McGregor of the 145-pound championship? That means Jose Aldo's the undisputed 145-pound champion. What difference does it make? If they had the Max Holloway fight, if he's the number one contender, is that going to make you boatloads of money? No, it's not. Wait for your opportunity to face Conor, but I understand he wants that opportunity to be right now because you never know when you're going to have to retire from the sport. All it takes is one injury and you're going to be sidelined for 2, 3, 4 years, however long it may be, and you may never have that chance to fight Conor McGregor for the big, big money.
It just feels like a lot of these fires could be put out a lot earlier. The latest example was Khabib Nurmagomedov, who was a pawn in these negotiations where he's the odd guy out. Dana White flat out saying, oh, it's going to be Nurmagomedov fighting Alvarez. And then we had this mythical deadline that Eddie Alvarez missed to fight at UFC 205, and amazingly this deadline was able to be worked around so that he now can fight. It's just these public games where the fighters don't feel like they are in on these negotiations and what the real story is. I think that a lot of them just feel used at the end of it, and they show zero loyalty to the UFC, as you're seeing with Jose Aldo.
Yeah, but I mean, the UFC understands that because it's not just Jose Aldo, it extends further than that with Rory McDonald and Ben Henderson and Matt Mitrione and all the fighters that have been lied to throughout the years, promised things that have not come to fruition. So whatever way the UFC management decides to deal with their athletes, if they treat them just as employees or if they say, hey, look it, we know what you've brought to the table. We know that you risk life and limb for this company. We're going to give you your due. I just don't know if those conversations are happening right now. It seems that they're not happening, and that's why you're seeing a lot of fighters, leave the UFC to maybe find greener pastures somewhere else.
Well, that's a perfect segue because one of those guys is Gabriel Gonzaga, who has said unless he receives a six-figure offer to fight again, he's done. He's retired. His last fight under a UFC contract was against Derek Lewis in that loss earlier this year, and this very well could be the end of his career. I don't see that six-figure offer coming his way, but this is someone, John, that I think has many memorable moments in the UFC. Probably the Mirko Cro Cop knockout being at the top of that, but someone who that fight propelled him to get his heavyweight title fight against Randy Couture that year.
Yeah, I mean, you can understand what all these guys are dealing with right now because we've been having this conversation over the last number of weeks when the fighters finally got to see, wait a second, they just sold this company for $4 billion. They said that Dana White is going to make $1 billion off the sale. I want my piece of the pie too. And for Gabriel Gonzaga, there's no way the UFC is going to re-sign him for six figures. Will he go to Bellator? I don't think Bellator is going to offer him six figures either. So yeah, it's a last ditch effort to try to see if you can make some money during a time where there seems to be a lot of money out there. Conor's saying he's going to make $40 million this year. I don't know if that's...
I don't know about that one.
Of course not.
That's Conor math.
But some people out there believe it. And it's like, wait a second, if he can generate those type of dollars, I want a piece too, because I've been a company man for the better part of a decade.
Last thing, we'll talk about this a little bit more on Friday, but we have a great main event on Saturday involving John Lineker and John Dodson. Your quick thoughts on this fight going into Portland?
Yeah, I think it's a very important fight because I don't think you think of Lineker or Dodson as, the top guy to be challenging Dominic Cruz for the title. Right now, that seems to be reserved for TJ Dillashaw, who's saying he's willing to fight Dominic Cruz for free, or Cody Garbrandt because he's very, very marketable. But right now, 135 pounds is very interesting. You have the future in the division in Garbrandt, in Almeida, in Aljamain Sterling, but then Brian Caraway pops up. But I think this fight is extremely important. If John Dodson can look very, very good, and he's faced every type of fighter at 125 pounds and 135 pounds, you go out, you stop Lineker, you look spectacular, you can leapfrog a bunch of people and maybe get your crack at Dominic Cruz.
All right, we will be chatting about that Saturday night, 8 Eastern. Tune in for our 1-hour preview show of all the fights going down from Portland, Oregon, and the prelims will air live here in Canada on Fight Network.